My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, a podcast where I, your host, try to give you some tips on how you can explain all this weird, wild, crazy conspiracy stuff to the people you love most. Because that's what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years with no success.
I've been telling everybody that our government is shady, but every time I do, my family thinks I'm crazy. The hollow earth, UFOs, aliens invading, fluoride in the water, they spray our skies daily. When I talk about these things, they think I'm crazy. There's no escaping anymore the evil that we're facing. Illuminati mind control, they're sacrificing babies. The end of days, but anyways, my family thinks I'm crazy.
What, they don't want to listen to you?
No, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They're just like, oh, here we go, Mark. Off again with your...
Mark being Mark again.
Yeah. So, that's the thing about podcasts is when you're on the air, and it's like therapy, If I can't talk to my family about this stuff, I'll talk to you, Matt, and all our listeners.
You'll just tell your whole podcast.
Yeah. So who are we talking about today, Matt?
They think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. My family thinks that I'm crazy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and tonight I have the true honor and pleasure of hosting someone who's been incredibly impactful on my life. One of the biggest inspirations for me to start this podcast. The great Sam Tripoli joins me here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. You know him as a 20-plus year veteran of comedy from the great Comedy Store in Los Angeles, California. You know him from his 7 different podcasts, from Tinfoil Hat to Broken Simulation, The Union of the Unwanted, Cash Daddies, of course, Punch Drunk Sports, and my favorite, Zero. I think that's all of them. You can never be too sure. He might even have some bonus content like an Ask Me Anything or Only Conspiracies. So, without further ado, the great Sam Tripoli on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy this episode with Sam Tripoli.
It's not a natural thing for me to say, but with God, all things possible. And the truth of the matter is like these guys aren't above the law of the universe. That's a shit. They are down here in the lowest level of existence, which is this karma world that we live in. So they aren't bigger. They aren't even top dog. They're not even close, man. They're specks of shit. And they think they're going to run stuff and lock stuff. And no, dude, they're never going to do it. They're ants. They're never going to do anything like that. And they took their shot. And I just don't think it's going to work. And people are waking up more and more to what happened. And people are seeing it more and more. And, it's not a Democrat thing. It's a George Bush death cult, fucking secret society, globalist, scumbag, Satan, dark arts, cabal that is being exposed for what they are right now. And you can sit there and say there's no consequences to their actions, no punishment. But, they may die peacefully, but they're all coming back blowing donkeys in Tijuana, and their kids are all garbage, and there's a reason for that. The energy you put out is the energy you get back, and it may not be instant. Karma may be tomorrow, could be the next second, or it could be years and decades later, but it comes and it gets you, and that's why you want to walk the earth. And there's only one sin, in my humble opinion, and that is, did you bring pain and suffering to other people? Boom, we're in.
You look well fed. You get drinking a coffee like me. I have some coffee as well. I never
it's like 9 o'clock. I'm drinking coffee right now, and then I'm like, why can't I go to sleep?
Yeah, I've had those nights very often lately. I've started drinking iced coffee. It's so hot here. I hated iced coffee, but they finally got me. The heat got to me. I started putting ice cubes in my espresso.
I hate iced coffee too. I really do. It's only good if you put like a ton of like sugar in it
That's what I do.
to give it texture.
Right.
Outside of that, iced coffee can suck it. Okay. And especially, listen, I must say this to you, Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee can suck it. Okay. I mean, like, it's nothing like, dude, it can't even come close to Starbucks iced coffee. And the Starbucks iced coffee can suck it too, but not as much as Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee is just dirt water, bro. And I'm putting that out there.
Well,
Come at me, Dunkin' Donuts. Get a little texture to your dirt water you're selling as caffeine coffee.
right. I agree.
Controversy.
I'm in the heart of Dunkin' Donuts territory out here in New England, so my local listeners might be offended. I will say I have been to a Starbucks with Sam in Philadelphia, and I was a little disgusted, Sam, because I'm a snob. I go to fancy coffee shops for my coffee and pay way
I'm
too
not
much.
against that, dude. I'm not against that either. I do like local coffee over everything.
Well, and
I'm
you
with
guys,
you on that.
you guys have your own scene, your own flavors out there on the West Coast, but you're not a West Coast guy, Sam. You are a West Coast guy now, but you know many people might not know this. You're somewhat of an East Coaster, or rather the burned over district. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but you're from what's called the burned over district. It's also known as the Psychic Highway. And you're here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. So we got to get a little bit of the gooey stuff out of the way. It's truly an honor to have you one-on-one and be in the host position, because I've been on 27 different podcasts with you.
27.
27.
Jeez.
I counted it today. I've been on the Union of the Unwanted 6 times, and I'm not sure. I think 2 of those times you weren't there, so we won't count those. But I'm 27 years old, so I was like, that's weird that I've been on
That is
27 of Sam's shows. I've been on
I
0.
can't believe I was 22 years old when you were born.
Wow. And it's 2022.
Damn. Montreal. You're going to have people just doing wacko shit to
Oh,
this.
God. Yeah, well, we got some wackos that tune in and some that harass on Twitter, but we don't need to talk about that. I've been on 0 6 times, so I'll just take the belt. I'll take the belt right now for 0 champion. And then I've also done 2 in-person podcasts with you. One from your hotel room in Indianapolis, talking about the Illuminati card game that we found in Indianapolis, and then one in Philadelphia. So yeah.
Well, respect on that, bro.
All that
Respect
aside,
on that.
it's truly a pleasure, brother. The first podcast we ever did was in March of 2020, and my life has changed tremendously since. The name of my podcast comes from a moment where I told my family, my extended family, I said to them, oh yeah, I'm working for this comedian in Los Angeles now. They're like, what? What happened to your great job at Amazon? I'm like, oh, I quit that because of the pandemic. And they're like looking at me like I just committed like social suicide or something. Like, who's this comedian you're working for? And I'm like, my family thinks I'm crazy. That's it, you know? And it just dawned on me. And enough about me.
Well, you know, that means your family must have had high expectations for you, which isn't the case with me. I mean, my parents obviously love me, but there's 0 expectations of me. When you're held back in first grade and your teacher and your parents are both teachers, that's never a great sign of things to come. I mean, you're held back in first grade. They're already looking for store receipts so they can get store credit, right? So my expectations of me from others was very low. Expectations of myself were very high. And at some point they were the only things keeping me going on that. So the fact that people thought you were crazy means they expected something out of you, which is very nice.
Absolutely. And I was a nerd dork for most of my childhood, so that's where those expectations came from. And I still am to some degree, as you probably
Did you get black belt in Taekwondo?
Well, I have a belt. I don't have a black belt in Taekwondo, but I do have a belt in martial arts. And I've competed in several Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu championships, several wrestling championships, and my senior year, I took my team to championship as the captain of the wrestling team, along with 3 other captains. But yeah, so
I should have had a brown belt in in JKD, but I decided to go to my prom because my teacher wouldn't move the test 1 week for me. So I had to go to my prom because I thought I was going to get laid. And then my prom day ended up leaving me and banging a 10th grader. And I didn't get my brown belt. But I would have got my brown belt. So I did achieve brown belt status in Jeet Kune Do.
I love that. Jeet Kune Do was incredibly inspirational. I had all of Bruce Lee's books as a young
It was
martial
MMA
artist.
before there was MMA.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the concepts basically created MMA. Yeah. This idea that you should take the best moves from all the different styles and find what works for you.
The only thing that wasn't prevalent at that time to the level it is now is jujitsu. That's the only thing that isn't in JKD. But if jujitsu been around, it would probably have made its way into JKD. And so, JKD was the original. And I wanted a black belt. I still want a black belt. I have many friends of mine who have black belts. And that is how my manifest is to get a black belt in Krav Maga. And I know I'm going to have to get my ass beat to do it, but I'm willing to sacrifice.
Yeah. My first martial arts instructor ever was a black belt in Krav Maga. He bragged about his friendship with Chuck Norris and all that. And I only went to his school for a couple of years, but yeah, he made quite the impression on me. He was notoriously a bodyguard for a very wealthy oil guy in my town. So that was my introduction to martial arts, as well as the UFC. My cousin Kyle, who's a state champion wrestler. And you just made me think of something. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is interesting because we have the land of the tiger in Japan and China, right? And that martial arts world that was influenced. And then it makes its way over to South America, the land of the jaguar, right? And if you've ever seen a jaguar fight another jaguar, they leap at each other and they slide on their back. So they go on their back. And most people are like, why would you fight from your back? But it's some of the most deadly moves you can pull on someone from your back. Arm bars, leg locks, all that stuff. So
imagine if you're watching National Geographic and you see a jaguar throw a fucking arm bar on like a cheetah or something like that. That'd be crazy.
Dude, if you had the claws and teeth that a jaguar had, you wouldn't need arm bars. You're just straight slapping people.
Yeah, man, it's out there. It's dangerous. Getting like that out there in the streets, man, walking around, dude. I walk around with a knife in Hollywood. I walk the late night streets, walking my pug. People are jacking pugs now because they somewhat look like fucking Frenchies. Well, I don't even know why people are stealing Frenchies. Those are like they're cool looking dogs, but they're health wise awful.
Well, people listening know that you are the champion of podcasts. You have over 7 podcasts. I do a full intro, and Broken Simulation is where you wander around Los Angeles looking for danger and then talk about it with Johnny. So people are well aware. I'm sure they listen to that. And if they they should.
Word on the street is you're trying to make a run at my title.
Well, let's see. Let me count how many shows I have. We have My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. We have Illuminati Confirmed. We have Your Handbook for the Apocalypse that I do with Michael Wan. We have Free Thinker Society that I do with Mike Romanelli. And then the newest podcast, which you just learned about, thanks to Chad Stemke, my co-host, as well as my girlfriend and Roman, is Esoteric America. So that's just 5. So I'm not anywhere close to it.
Got 2 more to go.
You're a lot harder of a worker than I am. I don't know if I could pull that off, but
No, you're a hard worker, bud. You definitely hustle, man. And it's like you're building something from nothing, and that's pretty impressive.
Thank you. And I am aspiring and have been inspired by you and your work for a long time. And it's surreal for me to, again, have you on the show and also work for you, because I was such a big fan of Tinfoil Hat and still am. At least 6 years ago, I think. I mean, I've been listening since the Off the Grid Ryan days. And I do want to ask you a few questions about your upbringing. But since we're here, what was your favorite guest from the Off the Grid Ryan days? Because you talk a lot about some of the influential guests that have made a big impression on you, and I'm familiar with a few of them. But who are the big guests from like the first 100 episodes that really made an impression on you?
That's interesting.
Because you had a lot of comedians back on. I love that because that's how I found you. I found you just by getting in
Yeah,
the
the show
podcast.
definitely changed, and it changed with Ryan Davis
Right.
off the grid, going after just trying to figure, just bring it on. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it got very dark too. It was very, very, very dark.
We
What if?
had
Oh,
Lucian Graves on, the founder of the the Satanic Church or whatever, the
yeah,
leader
which is
of it.
very interesting, dude, because I think it would be a much different conversation today than before.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
he'd
there's
probably be
more.
wearing a mask and a face shield too.
Well, he would, yeah, for 100%. Isn't that weird? Like, but a lot of things coming out. What his real name is, the fact that he's like a Democratic, like, um, fundraiser, stuff like that. That was stuff to get into. My understanding of what science, Satanism is, like all that stuff. So, I'm now looking at the top 100. Who are some of my favorite podcasts? Yeah, we had like Eddie Pepitone. Abby Martin is always great, of course. Um,
I
Jay
remember a
Dyer,
really. Go ahead. Which one was that?
dude, it's just super interesting. Some of the people I have on, they were very much, they're very much comedian oriented.
Hmm. Well, and it was a great foray into the topic because I think that's something as a non-comedian I try to do. With certain shows that I do is bring a comedic element to it, and it relaxes people. It's one of the biggest reasons why I loved your show because a lot of times I would listen to these denser conspiracy podcasts and it would be like doom and gloom, and then to listen to your show, it's like a little bit of like the nonsensical comedy mixed with the truth, which is what people are really, really dying for nowadays. But back then, it was still kind of fringe. And yeah, I thought it was amazing what you're doing, and I still do. But yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking at
anybody's
some of
come.
these.
What?
Like Jason Louv was great. Jason Louv was great. I enjoyed having him on. Like, dude, I mean Trish the Dish, she was from way back in the day.
You remember Magnora 7, right? Magnora, that one was interesting.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at these. These are all like super interesting. It was very much like back when Tim Dillon would come on my show. I was the first one of the West Coast people to put Tim Dillon
Well,
on a podcast.
his podcast it still is, but back when it was Tim Dillon is going to hell, I mean, they would just rail against conspiracies. I mean, they were interviewing different people like Nick Bryant and things. So yeah, Tim had that reputation that you shared back then, but obviously
That's where I met the Grimerica guys. That was a great thing,
and I'm
this
glad you
is what I
did
was.
because I learned about them through your show. And they've been a really educational show in my life. I mean, the guests they talk to are always very unique and they have their own Canadian perspective, which is always interesting.
How about this one, dude? When we did the Comedy Store,
Mm.
I mean, did the Ice House, and we had Eddie Bravo and Jimmy Dore on. Yeah, so that's the problem. Not that it's a problem, but Duncan Trussell, that was a big show. The biggest things that blew up my show were my dad's. I mean, where is it? Episode 1. Where is it? Here it is. December 13th, 2016. The first guest is out the gate, Eddie Bravo. And then I got into Dr. Mary's Monkeys, which was crazy. Then I wasn't even like giving them names. I was just naming the guest. Oh yeah, it starts with Eddie Bravo, episode 5, where it's like JRE 9/11 because he had just had Alex Jones back on. That was a big show. So yeah, and then episode 8, Greg Carwood from the Higher Side Chats. That's so funny.
So around that time, and it's weird how like driving, listening to podcasts, you sort of like, for me at least, you ever heard of like a mind palace or a memory palace, how people like memorize things by visualizing?
Yeah.
So this happens to me while I'm driving. It's like the world becomes like the memory palace, and I could remember certain podcasts based on where I was driving. And I remember learning about the Mandela effect the first time I ever went to Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia experiment is about the Mandela effect and maybe connected to it. And I found a book in a weird bookstore called an anarchist bookstore in Philadelphia called the Tinfoil Hat Guide. Okay. And then the first time you and I met, it was in New York City, but the first time you and I did a podcast, it was in Philadelphia. The first time we did a podcast in person. So I was like,
Damn.
you remember that? When I
Yes.
first started working for you, I came down.
Yes.
Augustino Zoida was there. I met a couple Philly
That's
comics.
what we were going to do, a show with David Lugo. And then we took off because I panicked. And he's like, where are you going? I'm like, I got to get this done. He's like, dude, we'll fix it. It's all good. And then we came back and we did the podcast. So a lot of people ask, what happened with Tinfoil Hat? Where did it blow up? And I'll tell you exactly where it blows up. You got to understand something. I mean, one of these guys' podcasts was super big at the time, but obviously I opened up with Eddie Bravo. I knew Eddie Bravo for probably since the early 2000s, right? And so what happened was I was doing this show with another buddy of mine. We love each other, but we had a falling out on a podcast. And we ended the podcast. And, at this time, Hillary Clinton is jacking the primary from Bernie Sanders. Everybody on the left is talking about it. Jimmy Dore, Lee Camp. I'm watching all these people breaking it down. I'm like, God dang, I guess something's going on. But I'm really interested. And I'm always talking politics. And so I decided to start a podcast. And I'm like, what is the name that I want to use? And I always thought, even though later on I realized they were a psyop, that NWA was the best name because you kind of took the word that you thought people hated or used to discriminate against you and kind of own it. So I decided what is the most, taboo conspiracy term. And I thought it was tinfoil hat. So I'm like, I'm going to name it Tinfoil Hat. And right out the gate, everyone's like, dude, that's the dumbest name ever. Nobody's going to do your show. But it ends up being the reason why people tune into it. So Eddie Bravo at the gate, we have a fun conversation, but the show really blows up. Episode 25 to 26. And I go back to back on Swapcast with Duncan Trussell and Doug Stanhope. And that's where kind of the show takes a quantum leap. I've known Doug Stanhope since the early 90s. Duncan Trussell's why I got into the Comedy Store. And so, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And, I've known these guys forever. It's so weird because we all eventually got into podcasting. Duncan and I were some of the OGs of the Death Squad crew. We were early Death Squad, which was like, Death Squad to me was like historic in that it was the first time you were seeing like a group of guys who couldn't get any kind of love that they really wanted with the industry using podcasts to get a following. And, obviously their shows blew up more than mine. Mine, the Naughty Show, I never got the traction that I always thought it deserved. I think if I'd done it today, I think it would get a lot more love than it did before. Because, Gareth Reynolds went on to do The Dollop, and that became huge. And it was me, him, Jason Tebow, this woman named Vicky Pezza at one point. And we were interviewing porn stars, and it was getting fucking weird, and it was fun. And I was really like laying into my drugs and my sex addiction at the time. So it was like a kid in a candy store. And, but it couldn't get the traction because it was like a lot more conservative then. Now it's like you got Legion of Skanks, you got Adam 22 who's crushing it, and people are a lot more open-minded to it. But we were all outlaws. Joey Diaz, Ari Shaffir, the Segoras. I mean, he had them all. Brandon Walsh. These are all great shows that all started on Death Squad. Kill Tony, Red Band, Ice House Chronicles, all that fucking shit. It was like when like comedy really leaned in to to podcasting. And, make no doubts about it, the East Coast wanted nothing to do with podcasting, like in terms of comedy. Like the New York City scene was very slow to get to it because they were way more into stand up.
Like David Tell, I don't think he goes on Skanks every now and then, but David Tell, I don't think he ever has made his own podcast. And Louis C.K., the only podcast he's ever done was Matt and Shane's recently. So yeah,
he's starting to do more of them.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was just on Schultz's podcast, but yeah, I mean, you are definitely a veteran, man, and it's an honor to have you here. And you've been doing this for a while with a lot of really influential people, and I think this podcasting movement that you're a part of has helped comedy in a big way. It's helped comics through this past pandemic, and yeah, it's very interesting. But doing the Naughty Show. Is it correct you're at Playboy Radio? Is there some elements to that
dude.
That maybe you've rethought now that you're the conspiracy rabbit hole master?
Go on. Sorry about that. One more time.
That's all right. Have you rethought, a lot of that time now that you know what you know about conspiracies, being that close to like, Hugh Hefner and that whole deal? Were you close to that?
Well, make no doubts about it, bro. I had a show on Playboy Radio, and they were playing my stuff about 17 times a week, but I never went to the Playboy Mansion ever. Nobody ever invited me. I never went there. And by the time I could have gone there, it was dead. It was all the old guys who kept going to the party, because once you were invited once, you were always welcome. And it had all these old dudes that were coming back, and nothing against old dudes as I slowly become an old dude, but obviously, the cycle of life. And so I never went there, and it was just a free studio. I mean, I felt like, because at the time I still loved Howard Stern. I thought he was great, and I wanted to be on Howard Stern. I wanted to be Howard Stern. And so I was like, dude, this would be great. I had the most gorgeous studio. I couldn't, but when people would walk in, they'd be like, what the fuck is this? I'm like, yeah. And it was a blessing, man. It was so cool. I get to go to Playboy Radio, sit in, and just got to talk to a guy who I consider to be the funniest human being on the planet, which is Gareth Reynolds. And it was just a good time. We got to interview porn stars, and Gareth and I always talk to each other. We always go, we didn't realize how good we had it, but I wouldn't go back to it again. That part of my life is done.
Well, and podcasting has totally superseded radios. I mean, most radio stations are dying to get podcasts to convert to their format so they could even, switch over. But yeah, podcasting has taken over that whole thing. And the Dollop, great show, holds up. I don't know if they still do episodes regularly, but it's a great show. A lot of history in that show too. It's funny.
Well, I got Gareth Reynolds into podcasting.
Tell us about that.
So basically, we were both auditioning for the same role on Steve Burns' new show, which was the Stanford and Sons, and that Vince Vaughn was producing, and the role ended up going to Brian Scalaro. I played the role all wrong. I took a artistic chance, and I am a shitty actor. I would never want to be an actor for two reasons. One, I can't act. And like my natural way of talking would be considered bad acting. And then two, I hate what they call coverage. And coverage is where you have to shoot the same scene over and over again, but from different camera angles. And I would go nuts. I just couldn't do it. So
yeah, that seems like some kind of MK Ultra programming going on with that. But yeah, I don't blame you. And it seems you've been typecast as a strip club goer. Those are the roles I've seen you.
I'm in like one movie and a couple docs, and I prefer docs because I can just go in there and talk. I don't have to rehearse lines and nail lines and try to act like normal. But by the way, it's just acting now is just saying your lines and staring at the camera. They've minimalized it just so you just have to be attractive. But the whole thing was we were auditioning. Gareth was in the room with me, and I knew Gareth through Steve Byrne. And I'm like, hey, why don't you come on my show? And he did the show. He made me laugh so hard. I'm like, you should be on the show. He's like, okay. So he came on the show, and the rest is history. And I don't get along with his co-host. I think he's I'm trying to be a positive guy. We just don't see the world the same way. But I'm happy for Gareth Reynolds. I love him very much, and I think he's great. And I got him I got him in the podcasting. Now that's kind of his thing now.
Yeah, it's really cool. There's a lot of people that you've come up with that are incredibly interesting, but you yourself are very interesting, Sam. I want to ask you something before we go too far into the present. Tell us this hat story, because you are from the burned over district, the Psychic Highway, where these Fox sisters blazed a new idea into the American consciousness that became the spiritualist movement that created the seances and the interest in things like Ouija boards and Halloween and all the spooky stuff. You're muted, Sam. What'd you just say?
From upstate New York.
You didn't know this?
I did not know
so
that.
the Fox sisters are from Rochester, New York.
Damn.
So that's, I'm imagining, pretty close to you. And also the Finger Lakes are very interesting as well. So,
I'm just going to tell you something about my childhood that's very interesting. My mother, who I love with all my heart, doesn't like to leave her house. She's not a big leave the house person. She likes to stay in her house. And so we didn't venture to a lot of places. We would drive through Rochester to Niagara Falls, but we would never stop anywhere. The state fair was 20 miles from my house. It was a big deal. My mother never went to the state fair, not once as a child. It wasn't until I was much older that I went. And then even then I was like, this is hot garbage. But as a kid, I probably would have loved it. But my mother never wanted to do any of that stuff, which is fine. I love her. She's a great mom. But all these amazing places I ended up, never really experiencing. I went back to Rochester a couple times to do stand-up. But to be honest with you, man, most of my time up to my 18th birthday was spent in Cortland, just south, and then maybe Homer. But that's about it. And the weird thing about upstate New York, and it's probably similar to where you live, is that you can drive anyway 20 minutes and find a city you've never heard of that was right next to you, that's been there forever. And you've never even heard of this city, and it's only 20 minutes away. Whereas in LA, if someone's like, hey, dude, it's about 20 minutes away from me, I'll be like, okay, I'll go. And that means nothing. Even an hour drive in Los Angeles doesn't mean anything because you got to drive an hour.
Yeah. Well, the town I'm in is 400 years old, if that says anything. So, yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And I've talked to you about this in the small opportunities I have to tell you about the strange mysticism of New York. But yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people, Sam. I don't think that's all that strange. I remember not really going very far up until I was able to drive myself, and the first 3 cars I had were so like hand-me-down beaters that I couldn't guarantee I'd get home if I went more than 3 towns away. So it wasn't until I
bought my first car for $800. I drive it half a mile, the engine blows up.
Oh my God.
My father almost got in a fist fight with the guy. My father almost got in a fist fight with the guy. So that day. And it's so weird because it was an Oldsmobile. And
Really?
it just boom, exploded. Then we were driving, my mother let me drive her Saab, and we ran it into the ground. I was the first one to drive because I was, again, held back in first grade. So I was a little older than everybody else.
Okay.
And so I was the first one to get a car. We had a yellow station wagon that we brought to this guy because my dad grew up poor. So he always had a soft spot for poor people. And he always wanted to help kids. Like, people would steal my bike, and my father would like take my rims back and give them the bike because he felt bad for them because he was poor as a kid. So that was my father. So my father once gave this guy my car to fix, and the guy just took forever. He wouldn't fix it. He was a real scumbag guy. And after we got our car back, like 2 weeks later, he got busted for just driving past a woman on her bike, turning around and running her over.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Wow.
dude. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, upstate New York, dude, I call it hood farmers. It's ghetto country.
Right.
Like it's like redneck, but it's not redneck, but it's a different kind of redneck. And it's hood.
And what does
It's
that
real
say?
hood.
What does it say about the cultural programming that's happened to the black people in this country? That there's this whole subsect of white people called Wiggers now that are like a totally different culture in and of themselves. I mean, that's kind of like what we have around here. They're not quite hood country. There's not enough country where I live, but there are a lot of Wiggers.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's like because it's like think about what it is. Get cash, bang chicks. It's real simple shit, you know?
Right.
And again, what I talk about on my show all the time, it's like if it's really simple, it's probably not good for you. Anything that's real simple, whether it's like game shows, anything Jimmy Fallon does on television, probably not good for you, right? The music, probably not good for you. The food you eat, if you can get in 2 minutes, it's probably not good for you.
Yeah.
And
I
it's just like-
would say that would be more cheap than anything, because I think the finer things in life are some of the simpler things, like the simpleness of just sitting by a beautiful stream and taking it all in,
Yeah, but you got to be able to like sit yourself down, do that, find that, go there, be okay with it. All this stuff that gets involved with just doing that. It's like, yeah, I mean, maybe it is. I don't know what the exact term would be.
That's what gets into something that I know you hammer this point in a lot on your show is be your own pirate ship, build your own business, be your own boss, and I find like that point you just made like not true for me, because hey, I do this podcasting thing thanks to you full time. You help me out by paying me every week, and I have other folks that I work for as well, but for the most part you're my only boss, and you're a great boss, by the way.
I am great.
So for me, I could go sit by a stream. I mean, me and my girlfriend went and swam in a lake today. No big deal, but
Well,
I think
get
that's
that.
important.
I don't
People
know
need
what
to do
the
that.
term would be. I don't know what the term would be, but whatever, like low frequency music is, low frequency behavior is,
Right. No,
whatever
I hear
that would be,
Right.
which is to me really easy shit.
Right.
I don't know why, but going down and sitting by the stream and taking in nature seems to be a little bit more different. But it's what I say about, in recovery. Like sobriety is easy. It's really easy. But using and abusing is hard, right? Like, especially if you're trying to get into recovery, to go and be in sobriety and then decide to relapse or do drugs and all that stuff, everything that goes into doing that, because the lying, the hiding, all that stuff becomes really difficult. Not using, not abusing is really easy. So that's what I'm saying.
I understand completely, and I think you make a great point, and you express that often on Zero, which is another fantastic podcast that if people aren't listening to, I've been on it 6 times. Go check it out, and there's a bunch of way better guests than I who have been on the show as well. But
it's a fire show, bro.
It's on fire, and the Telegram's
it's a
on
fire
fire too. We got 600 plus people in there now.
Yeah. I want to get that to 1,000 people talking spirituality. And most people, I get why they like tinfoil hat. I love tinfoil hat. I do not understand how you could do tinfoil hat and not be into Zero, but everyone's on their own path.
Right.
I feel like they're peanut butter and jelly. They have to go together in order for you to deal with all this. And then it just gets really, it's like once you start, like, I love conspiracies, but I'm beyond that shit. I'm past that.
There's a lot of conspiratainment out there. Like there's this level of like, just degenerates who just say everything's a conspiracy. And then there's a level above that that's conspiratainment. And then there's what you do, which has a message. You're looking for the truth. You have integrity about what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And you're a stand-up comic. So being a podcaster goes hand in hand with the role, at least now in 2022. And you do great at both. So yeah, it makes sense for you to have podcasts. And I think that, without Zero, I wouldn't be here in a certain extent. I mean, I had a podcast before I was a guest on your show, but wasn't really going anywhere with it. And yeah, man, the power of positivity and manifesting, it's incredibly important. And I wanted to ask you, as someone who kind of was insulated to some degree in your upbringing, only spending your time in, a small area, how do you feel now about like traveling to all the places you've traveled? I mean, you've been to the Middle East, you've probably been to Australia, I imagine. I don't, maybe
Yep.
not,
Yep. Yep.
but yeah, you've been to so many places as a comedian. I mean, that's a goal for a lot of people, is to travel and see the world, and it's not easy to find a job that can make that feasible.
Yeah, man. I mean, like again, expectations of me were very low coming out. It's like I was not meant for school. I wasn't meant to sit down. I wasn't meant to listen. I wasn't meant for any of that. But I was meant to talk shit, and I was good at it. Things work out for a reason. I talk a lot about my childhood. Me and my friends weren't really fighters. We never really, I stopped fighting at some point physically, and it became verbal combat very early. I talk about all the time. We used to go to this place called Pontillo's Pizza that's still there, some of the best pizza in upstate New York. And we would go there on a Friday. We'd sit in a booth, and if you were caught in this one section of the booth, you just got verbally annihilated, and you had to learn to, spit back. And I got very good at it. And I went to college, and I just started lighting motherfuckers up right out the gate.
And how do you feel though, as a West Coast comic now, so to speak, with that style? Because I feel like a lot of East Coast comics that I hear have that ball buster sensibility that a lot of East Coast people, comic or not, just naturally have. I mean, I grew up like that too. You were picking on each other not because you hated each other, but because it's like an endearing thing. It's like you're testing each other, sharpening each other's steel, and in that way you became, a Ronin. Your steel was sharpened in the fire that was that table in that restaurant, right? So, do you feel like a difference when you're amidst the more improv centric West Coast comics that maybe don't bust each other's balls because they
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Like right now in LA, it's much different than when I originally got here.
mm,
And I used to listen to, people from the East Coast talk about how shitty stand up was in LA. And I just never saw it. And it used to be like you would go to LA, and you could say some pretty crazy shit, and then you go on the road, and then you'd have to double it down. Well, it's changed now. LA has become what people have always thought it was, in my humble opinion. Now, I could have been biased because I only knew LA. So yeah, man, it's kind of crazy. I don't know what the future of comedy is in LA. You know, there was a time at the Comedy Store which is called the dark period, and I was a big part of that. I was running and gunning and making bad decisions, but I was also helping try to figure out how to bring it back. And at one point, I just loaded up the whole middle of the lineup. They were all friends of mine. I got in Steve Byrne, Brian Callen, Al Magical, Ian Edwards. They got in Sarah Tiana, Jessica Michelle Singleton. I got in all these people. And so like I helped I built the middle up so much that I got moved to the back of the lineup. And I ended up becoming a kind of the edgy guy at the end of the night, which I still love and I still do. So I always help bring it back. And then Joe Rogan comes back, and obviously he's the biggest reason that it blows up. And then we get into this period at the Comedy Store, which would be considered the greatest time ever at the Comedy Store. Even the people who were there for the first, like Gold Rush, or the golden era, would say that the second one was the best. That was the Joe Rogan, Joey Diaz time. There, Bill Burr as well. And then the COVID hit, and that all went away. And now we're in another build it up type thing. And I've had my friend just text me. It's like time to save LA comedy again. And we'll see what we can do. I'm a little older now. I have kids. It's not really my job. Like I didn't take it, like I took it real personal back in the day to build up the Comedy Store, because I knew what they needed, and I would be doing all these clubs, seeing all these killers and bringing them over. And I'd figured out how to get people in. It was a very simple thing. I would sit next to Mitzi. I would talk them up. I would block anybody from trying to hijack their their showcase, and I would help get them in and battle for them. It was very interesting because for some reason the booker at the time at the Comedy Store thought Brian Callen was too much like Joe Rogan, which, and if you saw their acts, they couldn't be more different. There was a running joke that Brian Callen and Joe Rogan were like half brothers, which wasn't true. But, you know, so I had to defend Brian to get him in, and she eventually picked him up. And I remember Brian going, well, I guess I'm doing stand up again. And he went on his kind of journey. So that's kind of like what I did. So I feel this real need, even though I not as much as I did before, to help build it back up and go up on stage and just rattle cages. And I'm old punk rock comedy. Like I'm like before Seinfeld comedy. Like I feel that there's nothing wrong with fucking rattling the cages of your audience. That this notion of that everything has to be laughs 24/7 is just ridiculous. That used to be for corporate comics, and there's nothing wrong with people making $1. But you know, you would do corporate gigs. That was it. And then this became this infection in the comedy, which was brought in by Jerry Seinfeld, who I love. And like his career is amazing. His stand-up was great, but he was used by the industry to kind of kneecap what Sam Kinison and Dice and Richard Pryor and George Carlin, Bill Hicks were all doing. The stop that and bring it into like observational comedy. And that's what happened for a very long time until podcasting came and YouTube came. And then once podcasting YouTube came, you started getting unfiltered real shit. And I don't know about you, but maybe it's my algorithm. Maybe I'm just wrong, but it just seems like YouTube is getting a little bit more gritty than it used to be. They'll never let conspiracies, or at least for me, I'm like on there like, if you see this guy, arrest him immediately.
Well, I hear you 100%. I mean, it's crazy what YouTube does, but I remember Google Video days, and that was like when I first saw like Loose Change, and you and I have both spoken with Jason Burmis, who was behind that really awesome documentary. And yeah, man, the internet has changed a lot. I mean, I'm only 27 years old, so like you said earlier, you're 22 when I was born, and I've seen the internet pretty much my whole life. They gave it to me in middle school, but yeah, it's very compelling, you know, what's happening now. I think there is a great awakening happening to some extent, and I think comedy deserves praise and really the proper due diligence or credit is the proper term for what they've done to expand the mind. I mean, Joe Rogan obviously is one example of that. You were just a guest on Joe Rogan's podcast, nearly 500 or 1,000 or something episodes since your last appearance, but we won't get too far into that. When it comes to one of Joe Rogan's buddies, Eddie Bravo, I want to ask you about him, because I remember when I first started smoking weed, I was a wrestler and a martial artist, and I don't blame Eddie Bravo, but I will say among the many factors that contributed to me being like, all right, I'll try weed, because I was originally just a straight edge kid. I saw, you know, what alcohol did to people at a young age, and I was just like, all right, I'm never going to do drugs ever, you know?
Yeah.
And then I see like Bruce Lee taking pounds of cannabis, grinding it up and eating it like a milkshake. You know, and then I see like a YouTube video of Eddie Bravo like ripping a bong and then like doing the twister and inventing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu moves, and that had a big impact on me. I was like, wow, this could be, you know, a plant that I use for my development, and it worked that way. I mean, no joke. Ever since I've started smoking, and I know this isn't an experience that's true for everyone, so I don't want to endorse smoking weed, but for me, it sharpened my mind. And I got to give Eddie Bravo a little bit of credit for helping me ease into it, because, you know, martial arts and cannabis went hand in hand for me, and it was cool to see an example of that. So when did you meet Eddie Bravo? How did you become friends with him?
I got picked up at the world famous Comedy Store, and Joe Rogan was one of the few big names that were still performing there. A lot of people didn't want to be at the Comedy Store at the time because it had lost kind of its allure. Mitzi Shore, who's like the best ever, um, she had just did not care about celebrities and did not care about the industry. So nobody really wanted to go there. She had her people, and as I get older, dude, and I start seeing people I know and love not get the spots they used to, or not get spots at all, I feel for people. Father Time is undefeated. But what happened at the Comedy Store is right when I had gotten to this to LA, which was 1999. Mitzi decided to gut the lineup, and she just cut bait with a lot of people. And today I feel for those people because that had to be traumatizing. But it was out with the old, in with the new, and that is just life. Life is that. There's a cycle to life. You're not meant to be doing the same things you were doing when you were 25 years old, when you're 45, and that's kind of the way it is. So so I got picked up, and I was lucky. Well, one of the people that were kept around was Joe Rogan. He was on news radio, and he just basically right around then and just started doing UFC shit. And he started doing, and this is what's crazy about Joe. He's kind of the face of a couple things. Reality television with Fear Factor. Joe was one of the first guys to do that. And he got really crazy. Well, Joe, hold on 1 second. What, Dana? No shit. So, long story short, because apparently the peanut gallery isn't liking this explanation. Okay. But she just snortled. Listen to me. So Joe was there, and Eddie was his best friend, and Eddie would hang out all the time, and we would just talk constantly. And that's when, Joe Rogan, Joey Diaz, Eddie Bravo, they were those three were like always together all the time. And that's where I met him. We were friends forever. So when I started the podcast, of course, he's the first one I call. I go, hey, dude, let's talk some conspiracy stories. He's like, yeah, for sure. And you listen to him, and he hears what the name of the podcast is, Tinfoil Hat. He's like, what? Really? And he was kind of like, I don't know about that. But later on, he's like, dude, that's brilliant. That's so fucking smart, man. And now he's got a show on Rokfin. So he's doing his, and he'll instantly be the best conspiracy podcast out there.
Well, he's crushing it. He's crushing it for sure. I would love to have him on this show. It's a lot harder than you think, folks. We've had many requests to get Eddie on this show. But anyways, I wanted to bring Eddie up eventually because he's talked about how he parents his son. And I think that's a really important topic that the people on this show, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy show, we get into talking about families and whatnot. And you have two beautiful daughters, twin daughters that were born around the time that Zero started, right? And this was a big part of why Zero even started to begin with, because
Zero is the reason why.
Right?
I mean, my kids are the reason why Zero was created, because, we had this show called Comedy Chaos, and it was, it's very weird. And I say this all the time. I'm waiting for people to give me shit about it, but it's very weird to say you had the number one thing on planet Earth and can say it with with honesty, because it's true. And that was Comedy Chaos. We were the number one showcase show on planet Earth. That meant you didn't go see one comic. You saw a lineup of like 6 or 7 doing 15 minutes or whatever the amount of time each set was. And we were the number one show at the number one comedy club. We were selling more tickets than anybody else, and we were selling more booze than everybody else. And basically the booze thing is the real number when it comes to the comedy club. And we were dominating in that. So we had the number one show on planet Earth, which is such a crazy thing to say. And people were flying in from all over the world to do the show. And so when COVID came and just annihilated that. I had to figure out a new way to make money. And like Rokfin had been just really on me to start a new show. And at the time, Tinfoil Hat was still not new, but it wasn't what it is right now. And the crowd was still growing with me. And the early Tinfoil Hats people had very little patience for spiritual talk. They wanted to get right to the deep states and the lizard people and the pizza gates and all that stuff. That's what they wanted to hear about. And I understand that. But I would do these spiritual shows with like Bongal and all these other people, and my numbers would just plummet. But those episodes resonated with me. So I'm like, I really need to do it. So they were begging me to do show on Rokfin. So I'm like, okay, man, I don't really have time to do another show, but I really do need money because I got 2 kids. I just got 2 kids. I got to take care of these kids. So I'm like, how about I do a spiritual podcast? Now, hand to God, I felt very uncomfortable with putting a spiritual show behind a paywall. But I knew at one point I would get to a point once my deal with them was done that I would put old episodes out for free. So that was the goal. Get through my deal with them and then put out free episodes. And so that's where we're at.
Can I say you underestimate yourself and the value you bring to people? And I think in this world of content creating, the listeners should, feel obligated and to some extent to share value back towards you, and sometimes that has to be energetically with comments, positive comments or messages, and other times it's financially. So there's no shame in that. And I only brought that up, and I appreciate you explaining, but I brought that up because Eddie's talked about how he wants to blue pill his son until he's ready for the red pill, so to speak, for lack of a better phrase. And I'm wondering, how do you feel about that? Knowing everything you know about spirituality and conspiracy, as a new father, are you excited to eventually fill your daughters in on this kind of information and sort of guide their way? Or are you going to leave some of the like crazier stuff out of the picture and just be there as a sort of motivation to them and focus more on the things that you talk about on Zero?
If you're asking me, I do believe that I will be more the way of Zero than Tinfoil Hat. I think there will be a discussion about, my dad, was a real runner and gunner. I feel like he had to live a life that maybe he didn't want to. I think my father was a lot, born around now. He wouldn't have gotten married when he did. I don't think he just wanted to, but it was kind of society at the time. And I don't think he was ever very comfortable with that whole part. But he did teach me one thing that stuck with me very early, and that was believe nothing what you hear and half of what you see. And that I remember when he told me that resonated with me. But I will probably give my daughters that advice, but I will give them advice into the spiritual realm of what I've learned along the lines of there's no reality, it's only mental, And that's why we'll do, how to deal with school, how to deal with teachers, how to deal with authority, how to do all that, how to play the game. What is the law? What is the law of the universe? Not the law of man, but the universe. What is the law? You and I talking here, there's a law, those things. And, if they listen to it, they listen to it. I hope they would, I mean, I'm very excited to see how these girls turn out. However they turn out, I will love them. They have 2 crazy people for parents, but I think, that will equal some exciting people. My one daughter's already really good with electronics. My other daughter is just a juggernaut, and I love them very much. And, there are moments where I'm like, these kids just don't want to listen to their old man. They're only 2. But, like this is what's the game, man.
Right.
And so I will move towards spirituality more than conspiracy because like I've always said, conspiracy always leads to spirituality. And if you could somehow jump to that and understand that, it's much easier to look at these things and understand why they're happening and be able to unplug from their psychological effects.
Well said. Yeah, and that's a really important topic for a lot of people, especially considering all the guests that you've spoken to who have talked about the education system and how corrupted it's become, and people maybe thinking about homeschooling and other ideas like that, which could lead to having a more well-rounded impact on a person's upbringing rather than the strange, you know, subset of things that they focus on. It seems like in school they focus a lot on, at least this was my impression, military history rather than history itself. And given all the alternative history conversations you've had lately, I mean, does it make you think twice? I know you said you're, you know, flunking first grade and all that, and we've heard you talk about that at length, but I mean, have you ever been curious before tinfoil hat about something like a lost civilization? Had that ever crossed your mind before you got into this stuff?
Nope, none of it. I don't know why. It was never ever pointed out that this, when we have Matt LaCroix on, that becomes a big thing that the storylines don't match up. And regardless of what you believe in Anunnaki and all that stuff, Eddie named basically his jujitsu school after, the Anunnaki planet. Now he doesn't think it's real. I think our history is way more rich, way more interesting, way more complex than they want us to know. They want us to think we came from fucking cavemen with spears. I don't know if any of that's real. That could all be bullshit too. And that's all I got. I mean, so I think we've been very advanced, and there's been a war with darkness, and the darkness has taken time and created chaos here and flipped a lot of shit, and that's why I kind of believe it. But no, I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about your show, and people may not have noticed this, but I noticed this, and I think it's still true. If you go far enough back in the Tinfoil Hat RSS feed, you could see all the shows Sam did prior to Tinfoil Hat. And I think what's so cool about knowing you, and especially for your daughters, I mean, there is like a literal, like, huge time capsule capturing your evolution as a person, Sam. And I think that's such a unique thing that not a lot of people can say. Is like, we've seen, as the listeners of your show and as a fan of your style of comedy and who you are, it's really cool to see how you've evolved, from, I mean, even the first 10 episodes of Tinfoil Hat to the 200th episode to the 500th episode to, now we're almost at the 200th episode of Zero, right? So it's like, you definitely have integrated a lot of this stuff into your life. Have you seen the results of this integration of knowledge in your life over the past few years?
Man, if you go back, you watch my old sports show, which I do occasionally, which is Punch Drunk Sports. And there's a Sam on there that is like cringy. I admit it, it's a little cringy, but I needed that guy at that time to survive because things weren't going very well for me, spiritually and financially, career wise. And I needed that guy to keep fighting for me because things weren't working out and there weren't a lot of options at that point, and some of the options were very dark, and without that guy, I might not be here right now. So the growth is real, and a lot of things have happened since the beginning of Tinfoil Hat, and the growth, the acceptance, the love. I used to watch people in comedy in LA go from like unknown comic with this kind of what I call day shift stripper look in their eyes when they know that, things aren't working out the way they thought it was going to, and they had panic, and then kind of suddenly things started working for them, and you saw that kind of wash away from their eyes, and this stillness and this happiness comes in. And that's kind of life in LA. It's kind of like you're in a giant body of water, and you're barely holding on, staying above water, and you're kind of just floating. And you never know when you could go under. And then somebody, when things start to work out, just kind of lifts their hands out, and you see this calm come over people. So I had a lot of people blowing up around me that used to open for me. And I never ever wanted anyone not to do well. I always wanted people to succeed and crush. I just wanted to be able to be a part of that and have my own success. And so, like, you see this kind of thing start to hit, which is a blessing that came out of nowhere. That if me and this one guy had never gotten in a fight, would tinfoil have ever happened? I don't know. So I think everything happens for a reason. And you know, I was on drugs then to numb kind of the unhappiness in my life. And now that I've kind of gone through this thing where I had children during this pandemic, and I got pushed into doing Zoom meetings for AA, and so I didn't have any more excuses. So so zero's happening. I'm hearing all the spiritual stuff. Then I'm going to these Zoom AA meetings, and I'm hearing a lot of that from the AA sobriety perspective. And no more excuses, and things just kind of changed. And I couldn't be happier. And it just takes time. Everyone needs to know that, man. I started stand-up comedy when I was 22 years old. I didn't start making like money where I didn't have to worry about it. Not that I'm like, fuck you money at all. I mean, I'm constantly like, dude, what the fuck is going on with my money, man? But I am now like at a place where it's like I'm not living check to check. I have a little tiny savings, and I've been able to take care of those around me that I love. And that was until I was 43 years old.
Well,
So
and a lot of people, I'm sure fans of yours, people out there have these midlife crises, and in a funny way. I mean, your life was sort of a crisis, and in midlife you steered the ship back on course, and you've done a lot of really great things in your midlife, which the system and the oppression of not living your full spiritual expression. Most people, they just go into the Saturnian work schedule, and then they realize it 40, 50 years into their life. Oh my God, what have I been spending my life doing?
yes.
Whereas, you're kind of like at a point where you see it, you're having a midlife enlightenment. That's what I call it.
Yeah, there's a belief that the more options you have in life, the less happy you are. And I was blessed to know I wanted to be a stand-up comic since the moment I knew I existed in the universe. When I have this moment where I am something. The next thought, like I am an entity, is my first thought. My second thought is, and I want to make people laugh, is my second thought. And
Well, and,
you
and
know,
I should correct myself. Your life wasn't a crisis up until a few years
no,
ago.
but
I
it
mean,
was
to
a
some
crisis
extent.
because it was drugs, it was alcohol, it was sex,
Oh,
it was
but you
all this
were
all
you were
low
like that,
frequency shit.
right? And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I shouldn't be so rude.
I
You're
do the
my
same
guest.
thing. It's all right. I know it's
No,
okay.
it's okay.
Who am I to judge anybody's interviewing skills? But you're doing great. But
Thank you.
so for me, dude, I was like I say this all the time. I was trying to set a high score, and nobody else was playing. And
Right.
because I thought that was what mattered, because that was pushed on me, the rock and roll and all that stuff, and banging everything that moves and all that stuff. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't change anything. Even if I didn't know that this where we are right now was or wasn't going to happen, I wouldn't have changed anything because it was very important to me at that time.
Well, and
And
I recently found you saying something that really, I mean, every time you talk about Ghosts and Ninja, it touches my heart because you're a great father. And but you talked about something that really hit me because I've always thought about this and I didn't think to tell you. And not that I should take credit at all, but I'm glad that this concept made its way into your world, the world of the Heyoka. And you are that in a way. I mean, it's a sacred clown. It's somebody who goes through the lower spectrums of life and shows it to people in a way that is vulnerable and powerful and courageous and important for people's evolution in their own lives. Because not everyone's made to be a sacred clown or a Heyoka. And I think you've played that role. And I think I forget if it was on Instagram or something where you posted something about it. But either way, when I saw that, I
yeah,
was like, wow, Sam really,
Matt Bel Air called me that.
yeah.
Yeah, Matt Belair has been a big part of my spiritual awakening as well.
Mm.
So I 100% appreciate him and what he's done for me as well. Yeah, man, that Heyoka situation, right? That that is why we're seeing censorship so much into stand-up comedy, why they're sending people to swing on people, um, why they're trying to shut down our YouTube channels, because we don't need money to do our art. And that is scary. Everything else kind of needs money. You got to get somebody to produce your record. You got to have somebody put up the money to make your film. And once you get in this place where you don't need that anymore, then you become dangerous.
Right.
And they don't like that.
There's a
They
lot
want
with
to be able to control the
podcasters.
purse strings.
Yeah, is it? I mean, yeah, absolutely. Comedy and podcasting. I mean, there's a low threshold to get it into it. Obviously, people who practice and put art into it and really hone their skills, they stand out. But yeah, I mean, you don't need anything more than a microphone for both. And it's incredibly powerful because for most of human history, we learned everything through the spoken word, and it's only been since the Gutenberg press that like words have been on print. So that's only 400 years. So what you're doing
No, I'm with you,
is
dude. I
tapping
think
into an
we're going
ancient
back
thing.
to spoken
Yeah,
word.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, some of the early remnants of this in our history are from radio, and there are really interesting shows on the radio. But I've heard you talk about Art Bell. You did a whole show on Art Bell when he passed away, sadly. But did you listen to Coast at all?
Not a lot, dude.
No, it
I
didn't make an
didn't.
impact on you when you were younger?
Dude, I'm telling you, man. Grew up in a small town.
Mm.
Like radio was just like, it was just one local radio station. Wasn't a lot
Now,
going on.
let me ask you this. If you could legalize mushrooms and give them out to the people of Cortland, New York, would you?
Yeah, I would. I think
Think it
it's
would help
important.
the
I wish I
town?
could. I would love that. I think everyone should do some mushrooms. I do get a little nervous at what microdosing is doing, why it's everywhere.
Mm.
It's like I just get nervous when something just shows up everywhere all the time,
Like
and the elites
vaping,
are pushing it out. Yeah, all of it. You're like, why is this happening? Why is this being allowed to happen?
right?
What is and I have shows where I give away so much fucking weed, dude. So much weed. And
I've never received any of it. What the
well,
hell?
you haven't been out here, bro. You should be out here.
I need to go to California. It's about time.
Yeah, you should, dude. You really should. And so it's just like the fact that weed's everywhere. Why'd they leave weed stores open during the pandemic? These are just things that I have to question why they happen. Now, I have zero problems with weed. I don't think anyone should be in jail for weed. I think you should be able to smoke weed. But the question is, why is it everywhere? And what are they doing? These super duper duper, like, science lab marijuana strains. Like,
Right.
you got to start wondering, like.
Well, it's the same thing with your food. You have to know your grower. I know my grower, and sometimes when I buy weed, so that makes me feel good. Other times I can't buy from him, but that's just the black market and the going underneath the system. I used to work at a farmer's market where I would trade bread, which is a time sensitive commodity, and we would trade it after the market was over with everybody, and I would come home with an abundance of food. And that's the economy that we've been it's been hidden from us, and that's what people should be interacting with. And that's sort of a different conversation from the point you were making. But I know, as a sober person, you do say that about mushrooms, and I'm interested in that experience that you had on mushrooms, because I know recently on your Joe Rogan appearance, you brought that up and you said, "Oh yeah, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of me doing mushrooms one day." And I think that's pretty cool that as somebody who's sober, you're still
Yeah. I mean, dude, that's a whole part of the 12 steps. Like, Bill W. wanted to do acid, and what that represents. And, Bob Sag had a joke about, it's not drugs unless you're willing to suck dick for it. And, which I didn't know that when I made the joke about shrooms, but that's kind of my whole thing. I don't think you can get addicted to them and what they do. I do believe that anything done too much is detrimental to you, but I really do believe that they open your mind and it changed my mind. Of course, changed my life and how I operated. And you hooked me up with a cat named Birch Driver, and he's been every time I have a conversation, every time I have a conversation with him, I learn so much and kind of changes the way I look at the world, which is kind of crazy because the first time we had a show, I think neither of us were happy with how it went, and it just two guys with different energies, and it just didn't click. But the second time it came on, it was just mind blowing and changed the way I operated. Uh,
And you're making a really
abundance.
good point about the law of polarity in a way, because I've had this experience way before I ever did a podcast with friends where I was very polarized certain people when first meeting them, and then those people became my best friends. People I at first impression I disliked them for whatever reason, and then they became meaningful people to me. Have you experienced that with more than just that one incident?
Yeah, man, where you hit it off kind of weird at first, and then later on you become the really close friends. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
I used to do that, and it's gone the other way too, where I was really good friends with people, and then we kind of stopped talking, and that's life as well. And I don't know, man. It's really into this frequency shit. Like, what is your vibration? You vibrate with people. You wanna meet higher ups of your job. You wanna rub elbows with a different you know class of people. I hate saying that, but like maybe there's people you would like to get into their inner circle with,
Mm.
for like business opportunities. Figure out their vibration and get on that vibration. It's a great example of that? Golfing. How many people do golf so they could take people on, a business, you know, a business activity where they could take a guy they want to, make a business deal with, have them golf, put a couple drinks in them, and then talk business. And all of a sudden they're clicking. That's all that is. It's the same thing. But you should do that with life. You should change. If you're not, listen, man, everything is about, if you want change, you got to make change, dude. That's it. If you want change, you got to make change. That's it.
I love
And if
it.
you don't, you're never going to make any change in your life unless you start asking yourself some real hard questions. And that is, what do I really want in the world? What do you think you want? And what do you feel you really want? Because those may not be the same thing.
Right. Brilliant. And yeah, I mean, people can find a lot of that and more on Zero. It's a great show. Sam gets into a lot of these concepts, but really quick, Bob Saget came up. What do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts on his recent passing? Did you know? You ever meet him?
Weird, bro. It's definitely weird. It's definitely weird.
Right. He's not the only comedian to pass away under weird circumstances. I don't know. I
I
mean,
don't know if it's anything like that, but I mean, I know he had heart issues and his heart was really clogged, and I'm not trying to say anything negative about the guy, but something happened in their hotel room that doesn't make sense to me.
yeah. Yeah, no, I don't. We don't need to end on a dark note. I know we don't have that much more time, but there was a point in time where you talked about the comedy scene being possibly infiltrated, and there was a comedian named Fang Dang who might have been a
Fang
spy.
Chow
Fang Chow. I'm thinking
and
of the
White
guy
Trash
who ratted
Brittany.
out Tony Hinchcliffe. I'm sorry, Fang Chow.
Fang Chow, White Trash Brittany, two Chinese comics that never really hung out the store at the same time. When one would leave, the other one would show up. And then when that one left, the other one would show up. And I believe the FBI has infiltrated the comedy scene. Why wouldn't? In particular, the Comedy Store. The Comedy Store was the mecca of stand-up comedy and comedy podcasts,
Well,
which were dominating everybody. It was
yeah.
very much and still is a West Coast game. Outside of like Legion of Skanks and their network, Gas Digital, it's mostly West Coast are the big ones. Andrew Schultz, of course, who's
Matt and Shane's
crushing it.
Secret Podcast. Got to give them a shout out. But
Yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah,
I
yeah,
hear you.
yeah.
It's
But
definitely.
even that blows up off of doing Rogan,
Mm.
right? And Rogan is a West Coast podcast. And Shane Gillis, like when that shit went down at Saturday Night Live, I put out a giant episode defending that guy and destroying all the bullshit that came along with that. And but yeah, that's still like Ari Shafir. I always called Ari Shafir the coyote to the Joe Rogan experience, right? Like he was just getting these guys on all the time. Mark Norman, Shane Gillis, the Legion of Skanks guys. And that's great because that's what makes Ari great, is that he wants to help others sometimes. And which is great.
Well, he's a
So,
big proponent of mushrooms too. Uh, it's very interesting in that way. But yeah, I mean, we don't even have to explain to people. I'm sure anyone listening to podcasts knows the impression that Joe Rogan's left. But it is
but
interesting. What?
just to finish the thought we had before, you can't convince me that there wasn't, you know, uh, FBI informants.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say. I mean, considering all the other fields of artistic expression that were infiltrated, I mean, all the political movements that were infiltrated by COINTELPRO, which you and I have
Yeah.
done an episode about in the past. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely suspicious. There are some comics, like I said, who seem to have been manipulated, and George Carlin, Bill Hicks. I mean, there's many comics that have been very against the grain in a way that juxtaposes the mainstream programming, which is literally television programming that's been going on since the 1950s, man. And that's why I'm so grateful to know you and be a part of Tinfoil Hat in the way that I am, because your show is bringing truth to the people in a way that wasn't possible only 10 or 20 years ago, right? And I think that's really a powerful thing. It's not just people in the United States, it's people all over the world. I'm sure you
All
see
over
it.
the world, dude.
You're
And it's
number
pretty
one
amazing to see.
you're number
And
one in Turks and Caicos for Broken
number one, I
Simulation.
don't even know where that is, and I'm dominating that place. And the biggest thing is this, dude. I love seeing new podcasts. I love seeing new, conspiracy podcasts, and I love giving them chances on my show because they can't get all of us. And we're definitely going some interesting times. And again, dude, like all this shit going on with the FBI, they're trying really hard to label us domestic terrorists. I don't think it's working. And I don't know how much longer you want to go, but I just wanted on this, and I must say this, and it's very it's not a natural thing for me to say, but with God, all things possible. And the truth of the matter is like these guys aren't above the law of the universe.
Okay. I
They're
love it.
specks of shit. They are down here in the lowest level of existence, which is this karma world that we live in. So they aren't bigger. They aren't even top dog. They're not even close, man. They're specks of shit. And they think they're going to run stuff and lock stuff. And no, dude, they're never going to do. They're ants. They're never going to do anything like that. And they took their shot. And I just don't think it's going to work. And people are waking up more and more to what happened. And people are seeing it more and more. And, it's not a Democrat thing. It's a George Bush death cult, fucking secret society, globalist, scumbag, Satan, dark arts, cabal that is being exposed for what they are right now. And you can sit there and say there's no consequences to their actions, no punishment. But they may die peacefully, but they're all coming back blowing donkeys in Tijuana, and their kids are all garbage. And there's a reason for that. Because the energy you put out is the energy you get back, and it may not be instant. Karma may be tomorrow, could be the next second, or it could be years and decades later, but it comes and it gets you. And that's why you want to walk the earth. And there's only one sin, in my humble opinion, that is, did you bring pain and suffering to other people?
Yeah, violating other people's free will is never going to do any good for anyone. What you put out comes back to you threefold. And yeah, I think that's a hell of an empowering statement, Sam, and that's why I love Tinfoil Hat so much, man, because it's never a doom and gloom conclusion. You know, there's this message of empowerment that stays with you, and I think that's worth praising, and you deserve all that. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. I have one last fun question to end on here.
All right, fun questions.
What
Fucking fun.
what are you curious about that maybe you think we haven't talked about on, or you guys haven't talked about on Tinfoil Hat yet? Because as the booker of the show, it's my prerogative to bring you what you're looking for. So is there any conspiracies that you've heard, that you've learned about, that you just haven't gotten to go into yet with a guest? I mean, I heard something about spontaneous combustion, and I don't know if you learned much about that, but I think we got to do a show on spontaneous combustion.
I mean, I'm down with all that stuff. Like, I really want to get more into mysteries. You know, that's what I want to get into. I mean, here's the whole thing, dude. We've done so many shows on the cabal, all that stuff, and they're great. But I just want to give people constantly a stream of new topics, new the new guests, new everything like that, so that they're constantly don't. It's like Christmas. What is in the package every time they see a new tinfoil hat episode came? And the beauty of the podcast is that people have that it has resonated with people to the point that they're now doing podcasts. So there are a lot of conspiracy podcasts. So I just want to say, I just want to be more, an OG and be putting out stuff that maybe everybody else isn't putting out. Not that I'm in competition with anybody. I've never been like that. That's a big thing I take pride in, that I kind of brought to the conspiracy community, is let's work together. We're stronger together than apart. I think when I came in there, they had a very much a boxing mentality of I'm going to get mine, and we're in competition, which I never ever feel like tinfoil hats in competition with everybody. That doesn't mean we're the biggest, because we are not. That just means that we're on our own path, and what anyone else is doing has no effect on us. And that's kind of where we operate from. And, I like helping people. I like giving, I always bring up the human vibration. She is like one of the people I found that had a very, very small following on Twitter, and I had her on, and it was a great conversation. She's gone on to be kind of a name in the truth community, and that's kind of what I like to do, because you got to lift people up. I do it in comedy now. I'm trying to get all my friends who are edgier comedians, helping them get stage time, which is kind of one of I believe the effects of the Naughty Show, both the live and the podcast, was that it allowed dirty, edgy comedy to find a way to make money. Now, it was like myself, Joe Rogan, Death Squad, Legion of Skanks, Gas Digital, all these guys were kind of, we were, Ari Shafir, obviously, as well, creating an ecosystem in which Raw and Real could thrive. And like, to me, that will be, hopefully, when the story is told about the earlier days of podcasting, depending on who will tell it, will be hopefully that group of people will be included as allowing, people to be themselves on and put out a product that represents how they feel and how most people feel. And I would tell you that, the edgier comics, the edgier shows tend to be more blue collar. And that's a lot of this country. So, that's kind of the journey that we've been on, and it's a real blessing. So I'm very happy. There's a lot that I get told all the time. Hey, dude, you inspired me to start my own podcast. It's great. Do it for fun. Try to make money. There's a lot of money in it. You just gotta hustle, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Very few can say that they are in the top 0.05% of all podcasts in the world. And Sam Tripoli, I don't know if you knew that, but that is a fact. Sam, it's been a pleasure talking to you, brother. As always, every time I can have a conversation with you. It's a true pleasure. We've done 28 podcasts together now.
28, brother.
Which is crazy. And yeah, one last question. You're on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. I think I know the answer already, but does your family think you're crazy, Sam?
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
Real
But
simple.
they're also happy because they thought, a lot of people thought I was just going to pump gas. So, and nothing against people who pump gas. A job is a job, and I respect your grind. But that's what was expected of me. But yeah, during the whole COVID thing, I was the black sheep.
I hear you.
My whole city, dude,
Right.
of up where I grew up, was like not happy with me.
Well,
They
small
would tell my
town,
mother
yeah.
that.
Word travels fast.
It's crazy, dog.
Wow. Well, shout out to Cortland County. Shout out to everyone in New York. If you're in the New York, Connecticut, Vermont area, go see Sam Tripoli September 30th in Saratoga Springs, New York. Howie Dewey will be there. I'm going to try to get there if I can drive there. And yeah, I hope you, wherever you are listening, have a great moment wherever you are in the now. And we hope to see you in Saratoga Springs on September 30th. We've also got a show coming up real soon. Maybe this episode will be out by then, but you'll be at the 3 clubs in Los Angeles on
I
August
just
16th.
added a show at Diana,
Oh, yeah.
Florida.
Deanna,
at the Improv.
Florida.
Deanna,
Beach.
Florida.
Yeah.
Deanna Beach, Florida, August 25th through the 27th.
Right on.
Dania, whatever.
Right on. All right.
All right. You're the best, buddy.
My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. Maybe, maybe. I'm a little extraterrestrial, trying to stay human in a cesspool of professionals. But I confess too much off of the tongue. All my aunties and my uncles shield the ears of the young. I be saying shit and they don't know where it's coming from. In like 100 years we went Zarbomba from guns. Check the facts, check the Fed, check the stars. Stanley Mines was murked for a water fuel cell car. They each their own, you can stick with your own ways. But eat the rich, you drink the motherfucking Kool-Aid. And I can see the red on your lip stain. White skin, blue collar, pure American made. Fuck it. You can keep your blood-soaked heritage and run the soul off the moon-landed narrative. Yeah, my girl thinks that I'm embarrassing. My folks think I'm nuts, but never question the parenting. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the 5th kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. You might think that I'm off in the deep end. One too many Netflix docs on the weekends. But check the budget for a military defense. Tell me we ain't scared of something not within reason. Steel beams, another 1492. And 9/11 was the red, white, and blue. And you be lit off the floor riding, ain't got a clue. All your dreams just shit on a Rockefeller shoes. Don't believe a damn thing a politician ever said. Ain't one brick left to gold up in the Fed. They still got bricks of cocaine to make crack. Oxy's killing the working class, FDA's whack. Talking like this, got Ken talking behind backs. Too much to unpack, so they talk smack. And I'm just trying to converse with my clan, but it ain't fan. So I'm here setting up camp. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pack thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the 5th kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. My family thinks I'm crazy. Maybe, maybe, maybe. Just maybe. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the 5th kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Yeah, I think one thing I've learned is you can't rule anything out. So